Kidding me. Okay. I guess we're ready to go. Dennis, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Again, welcome to the North Central U.S. Climate and Drought Outlook for November. It's something we do on a monthly basis, and we sort of trade off our state climatologists in our region, which is the north central part of the U.S., and they do a fantastic job of summing up the conditions past, present, and future in terms of climate relative information. So this month, we've got Martha Shulsky. She is the Nebraska state climatologist who's going to do the presentation. Before she gets started, I just want to say that if you have any questions or comments, for that matter, we usually look at them in the question interface or panel on your webinar screen there. And just as things occur to you, feel free to write them in there, and we'll get to them hopefully at the end. Martha will take 35-40 minutes, and then we'll do questions and answers at that point. Also joining us today is Dennis Toddy from USDA Climate Hub over in Ames, Iowa. He'll be helping to answer questions as we go as well. So at this moment, I will turn it over to you, Martha, and thank you so much for doing the presentation this month.
All right, thanks, Doug. Thanks everybody for listening in. I'm going to be taking you through the conditions over the past month in the North Central region. This is a collaborative effort. You see a lot of logos on the screen there among NOAA, NCEI, USDA Climate Hubs, American Association of State Climatologists, the High Plains and Midwestern Regional Climate Centers, and the National Drought Mitigation Center. So a lot of information is shared among these groups. These webinars are held on the third Thursday of every month. So the next one will be on December 16th, and you'll hear from Dr. Justin Glisson, who is my counterpart for the state of Iowa. You can have access to this webinar and future webinars, and past for that matter, at the links below. And as Doug mentioned, we'll be open for questions at the end. So just some bullet points. What I'll be talking about today is a recap of year-to-date conditions as well as recent conditions. We'll look at changes to the U.S. Drought Monitor. So one was just released today. So we'll go over the last 1 to 2 months of changes in the U.S. Drought Monitor. We'll look at some impacts. It's been relatively quiet over the past month, but there are some impacts in various parts of the region. So we'll get into that, some of which you see on the screen here. And then we'll get into the climate outlook. So those, the recent release of the climate outlook for December and for the winter and getting into the spring. So images that were sent to me from my counterparts from around the region, and I'll touch on some of these items throughout the webinar. We see winter wheat in Kansas that's struggling due to dryness conditions. Conversely, in the north, we see corn that was in fact harvested since this photo was taken a few weeks ago, but we see standing water in that cornfield. And it's been really warm out in Ohio. So thanks to Aaron Wilson for sending that nice fall picture there. So recapping year to date, quite warm across the region. So the numbers that you see for both of these images is a ranking, and there's 127 years of data. So the period of record goes 1895 to 2021. So if we look at January through October, this is how the average temperature and the precipitation total over that time period. Those numbers indicate how those conditions are ranking. So you see a lot of orange on the temperature graphic. So it's been quite warm for that year to date overall, again, 9th warmest nationally. When we look over at the precipitation conditions, you can see green there in the eastern part of the region, Missouri and through Ohio, near normal conditions for the state as a whole, for the central part of the region. And then to the north and northwest, you'll see very dry. So Montana, that number 4, that's 4th driest on record over those 127 year period. So let's zoom in on just October specifically. So on the left, you're seeing kind of a gridded picture of average temperatures. And for the most part, we've seen above average to much above average to even record warmest. So Ohio was warmest October on record. And if you put your eyes over to the western part of the region, we see kind of a transition to near average conditions for the month of October. And on the right, I am showing the minimum temperatures. So the average low during the month of October, you can see it was record warmest for those states in red there with that number 127. So Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan all had record warmest. And then some of the surrounding states in that orange color, those was in a top 10 warmest, again, for the nighttime low temperatures. Precipitation over the last 60 days. So just kind of note the color differences between anything in green to blue to purple is wetter than normal over the last 60 days. And then anything in yellow and orange is below normal. So notice how we see kind of these wet areas versus dry areas. And you'll see this pattern show up on these various graphics that I'll be showing, and particularly for the U.S. Drought Monitor. So we've had wet and as well as dry areas across the region. Some have been particularly wet. You can see in the eastern Dakotas, as well as Iowa, into Illinois, Indiana, and up into Michigan. And then conversely, some dry areas in portions of Minnesota and Wisconsin in particular. Okay, so over that same 2-month time period, you'll see how that has impacted the U.S. Drought Monitor. So we're comparing this most recent release with 2 months ago. And so what are the changes that have taken place in the U.S. Drought Monitor over that 8-week period? So the areas in green, we've seen an improvement, 1 to even 4 class improvements for the Dakotas and Minnesota and portions of Iowa, whereas kind of on the perimeter of the region in Wisconsin, in portions of Colorado and southwest Kansas, as well as into Montana, we see those yellow and orange colors on the map. So that means we've had degrading conditions, drought conditions, over the course of that 2-month time period. All right, so we'll look at October precipitation. We already looked at temperatures and saw that it was quite warm. It was also wet overall during October, so 9th wettest nationally, much above average for a lot of the region. So on the left, that number that you're seeing again, that's the statewide precipitation total ranking out of those 127 years. So those darker green color, we're looking at much above average for the state as a whole. So somewhere in the top 5, top 10 wettest Octobers, whereas places like Wisconsin, Colorado, Montana, those areas have missed out on precipitation. So the image on the right, the larger image, we're looking at a gridded view. Sometimes the statewide average is not obviously reflective of everything that's going on in the state. So sometimes I like to look at this gridded product, which shows you that variability around the state. So you can see Montana, for example, in the southeast versus the central part of the state, we had some differences in precipitation, Colorado as well, and Wisconsin. Okay, so we'll transition to more recent conditions. So the past 30 days, overall over this region, you see a lot of red on this map. So a departure from normal temperature, those are 2, 3, 4 to even greater than 5 degrees, especially in the northern and western portions of the region. Less so where you see those green colors. They're into southern Missouri, Illinois, portions of Kentucky, and Indiana. You see cooler than normal conditions over the last 30 days. So this is going mid-October to about mid-November. Okay, so the first freeze. These images are courtesy of the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. And the main theme here is that the first freeze, as well as first frost, looking at either the 28-degree low temperature threshold or 32, the date that we first hit that in the fall, indicating the end to the growing season. Here I've got this year, 2021, on the left, and the median date is on the right. And if you just notice that shift in colors, we see that we were later than average by anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks, depending on where you are in the region. Some portions of the region did even see the latest freeze on record. And it's also important to note that there can be quite a range between that earliest first freeze date and the latest first freeze date. It does vary quite a bit for the central US, but this year in 2021, we were several weeks later than average, or even the record latest compared to what we typically are. Okay, so I talked about temperatures over the last 30 days. We'll look at precipitation. So anything in the yellow color is less than normal. The green to blue colors, that's greater than normal precipitation from that mid-October to mid-November timeframe. For a lot of areas, we're entering into the dry time of year, so it's typically not a time during the year where we get a lot of precipitation. It is drier, but again, you can see different regional differences throughout the north central US, where it was wetter than normal, much so in Iowa, with those blue and purple colors that you see there. So again, some differences throughout the region in terms of precipitation over the last 30 days. So we'll look now at the latest US drought monitor. So this was released today. It's valid as of this past Tuesday, the 16th. And what you'll note is kind of this gradient where it's been wet in the southeastern part of this north central region. So Missouri, kind of into Ohio and up into Michigan, we see primarily drought-free conditions. And then once we get into northern Illinois, into Iowa, and areas further north, and then into Nebraska and eastern South Dakota and areas to the west, this is where we have this ongoing drought conditions. If we look at this region as a whole, 46% of this region is in moderate drought or worse, so D1 to D4. We'd have 16% of the region that is experiencing abnormal dryness, so that D0 category. And then the D4 and exceptional drought, that area remains confined to Montana. So it's very, very dry. Again, this is 4th driest year-to-date conditions on record for Montana. So that's where we see these exceptional drought conditions. So over the last 4 weeks, so since the previous webinar, and again, you can have access to that on various websites, and I'll show those again at the end of the presentation. Laura Edwards and Brad Rippey did a nice job with that one. That's always a busy one because we talk about the end of harvest and crop conditions. So in the last 4 weeks, where have the adjustments been made to the US Drought Monitor? So the areas that I have highlighted in brown there, that's the areas that have degraded. So it's gotten drier. We've maintained that dryness pattern, and drought has intensified in those areas. So portions of central Montana, eastern Colorado, and into southwest Kansas, as well as Wisconsin, much of Wisconsin, and northern Michigan. So those are the areas that have seen 1 to 2 class degradations and drought conditions over the past month. And then we see improvements for a lot of the area, in fact. Generally 1 class improvements. However, I will point out into Minnesota, and then especially into central Iowa there, we see a 3 class improvement, in fact. over the past 4 weeks. So again, this is how the drought conditions have changed according to the U.S. Drought Monitor over the past month. Soil moisture conditions. So these numbers should not be a surprise here based on the precipitation trends that I've been showing you. This is a statewide view. So again, local conditions can and do vary, obviously, but from a statewide perspective, it's important to, at this time of year, to think about subsoil moisture conditions. So deeper in the soil profile, and going down to about a meter or a few feet in depth, how much moisture is in that deeper soil layer, is in that short to very short category. So you can certainly see Montana stands out here. 94% would be in that short to very short category. North Dakota 63%, Wyoming 83%, Colorado 74%, and then there's more moisture in that soil profile the further east you move. So indicative of those generally wetter conditions that we've seen. So again, that top number is the percent of the state that's estimated to be in short to very short in that deep soil moisture, and then the bottom number is the change from last week. So if it's a positive number, that means that that change that number is increasing. So that means there's less moisture than there was the previous week. There's also a product that shows topsoil moisture, and that's typically the top 6 inches roughly. That image, I'm not going to show it here. You can access it on the URL that you see below. It's generally slightly better conditions than what you see here. So generally a bit more moisture in that topsoil layer compared to the deep soil moisture. So that was a statewide perspective. So let's look at some modeled data. Here we're looking at the LIS model. There are different ways that we can look at soil moisture, and so this is one of them. It's a model data, and it takes into account point observations that we have around the region, and anything in the orange and red color, there's a deficit. The percentile is in that low category, so most of the historical observations are going to be greater than that. So those red areas are indicative of where we're seeing dryness, and then those green and blue colors, that's where we're seeing some wetness. This is in the whole profile, and again, it is a model, so take it for what it's worth. But in looking at a regional perspective, we see these wet and dry portions of the region reflected in this pattern. Okay, so sticking with what's beneath us, we'll stick with soils, and here we'll look at temperatures. And I'm just giving you a snapshot from a few states around the region. So I've got North Dakota from the North Dakota Agricultural Weather Network there on the left, data from network where I sit here in Nebraska, that's from the Nebraska Mesonet, and then data from Iowa in the right-hand corner there. And you can see that there's temperatures are running at about the daily average at 4 inches depth, and these are under primarily bare soil. The North Dakota does show soil temperature under turf. That's that second number that you see. The first number is under bare soil. So we're seeing soil temperatures in the mid-40s range in Iowa as well as Nebraska. Again, that's a daily average. And even in North Dakota, we're seeing temperatures in the 30s. So the point here is that soils have not, on a daily average anyway, are not reaching freezing, which is good news. Thinking about those dry areas, precipitation will be helpful to augment and help fill in that soil profile, since we're clearly done with the growing season at this point. So soil temperatures are relatively warm. So we'll transition to get a hydrology perspective and show a few graphics here. This is a 7-day average stream flow that you're looking at here from USGS. So these are point observations, and you see kind of a mix of conditions across the region. You see the dryness is reflected in some areas of Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Southwest Nebraska, as well as portions of Minnesota, as well as Wisconsin. And then conversely, we do see above normal, that's in that turquoise coloration, as well as in the blue, that's great, the 90th percentile class. And we do see some black dots on there. So again, we see these recent precipitation trends reflected in some of these river gauge observations here. I have pointed out some recent wetting trend and kind of alleviation of drought conditions or coming out of the drought here in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And what seems to be the case is that that precipitation is helping to fill the soil profile, and it's not necessarily being reflected in some of these river flows where it's infiltrating and going into that profile rather than changing the river flows. All right, I'll just touch on the Great Lakes briefly. The big news here is that it's much warmer than normal overall. There's no ice yet. Lake levels are generally high. So you see a snapshot of Great Lakes surface temperatures there on the left from the Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab. You see a lot of green on that map, so generally 50s to close to, but generally mid 50s is the lake temperature there. And my colleague out of the State Climate Office in Minnesota, Pete Goulet, he sent some images and links to stories about flooding in Grand Marais, Minnesota. So that's on the north shore of Lake Superior, where they had several inches of rain and a storm come through. Precipitation and wind and waves caused some flooding in Grand Marais, and I believe other portions of that north shore of Lake Superior there in Minnesota. So warm on the lakes. We'll look at snowpack. There's not a whole lot out there yet. We are kind of early in the season. So I'm showing you a couple of images here. One is well, focus on the one on the right first. That's from a remotely sensed look at snowpack conditions. So we do have some snow in the far northern plains there. It's not very, it's less than 8 inches for the most part. So there's the URL where you can find snow depth as well as snow water equivalent throughout the season. And if we look at high elevation areas there on the left, we're looking at snow tell sites. These are snow depth. You may not be able to see the coloration difference, but it's generally anywhere from 0 to 20 inches. There's not too many high elevation locations that have much more than that. But to where you see that lighter yellow color, that's where we've got starting to get that snow build up there in the higher elevations. So for the region, the snow cover right now is confined to kind of the central northern plains as well as the higher elevations.
Hey, and Martha, at the very, very end of this, we'll show the west-wide snow equivalent map just to give more coloration and an idea of what it looks like out there. I'll show that later. Okay,
sounds good. Okay, so I'll have a few slides here that look at harvest progress. So we're looking at corn and soybean here. Again, these are statewide from the USDA Ag Statistics Service. And harvest is progressing and nearing completion. So 90% harvested. So we'll focus on corn in particular. They're on the left. So North Dakota, South Dakota, in Nebraska, around 90% harvested. And again, that lower number is that's the change from the 5-year average. So how does this year compare to the last 5 years? So you see a lot of those numbers in the 90s there for the Western Corn Belt, and into Ohio, that's sitting at 75%. I know there were some delays due to wetness issues in that part of the region. So we'll transition over to soybean there, the image on the right. That's mostly done. You can see North Dakota is 100%, South Dakota 99%, Minnesota, Nebraska sitting at 98%. So pretty much all the states in the region are at about 80% harvested or greater. A few more harvest numbers here. Sorghum, these numbers are sitting in the 90s or higher, aside from Kansas. There's an image there from Chip Redmond down at Kansas State University. So harvest will be finishing up there soon. And then our last look at harvest is sunflower progress. So at 83% in Colorado, or 82% in Colorado, 83% in North Dakota and South Dakota, and 89% in Kansas. And then our last kind of agricultural look is looking at wheat progress. So the percent emerged, that's the image that you see on the left. So we'll focus in on a few states here. So Nebraska and South Dakota, 98% that crop statewide has emerged. 86% in Kansas, 72% in Missouri, 71% in Illinois, and so forth. So let's look at winter wheat condition. So that's the image that you see on the right. And I've kind of highlighted the areas there in red where we're at around 25% or greater of winter wheat is in percent poor to very poor condition. So the areas that have been subject to dryness or even excess wetness issues are in that poor to very poor category. So you can see how the conditions are they kind of stand out for Montana in these images. So 42% is sitting of the winter wheat is at poor to very poor condition. So again, these images come from the USDA Office of the Chief Economist in their weekly weather and crop bulletin. Okay, so wildfire issues. I have mentioned briefly about snowpack condition. We don't have snow on the ground for much of the western US. It's also dry. There's a lot of this area that I've outlined on this fire danger rating, which happened to be for the 16th of November, so this past Tuesday. There's a lot of this area that is in drought. So that combination of dry conditions, low humidity, gusty winds, we've had red flag warnings out for portions of this region, have recently fueled wildfires. We're hearing reports from Colorado. The image that you see here is from the Nebraska Panhandle, the Buffalo Creek fire in one of the Game and Parks water management areas. Thanks to Gary Stone for sending me this image. So this is definitely a concern across the western part of the north central region here. Again, until we get this snow cover, this is going to be an issue given the dryness that we have for this area. Okay, I will transition now to the outlook portion. So we'll start with the near term and then go to the longer term seasonal climate outlooks. Over the next 7 days, this is a QPF, which is a quantitative precipitation forecast put out by NOAA. And for much of the region, this 7-day precipitation outlook has looked pretty similar over the last few days. It hasn't changed a whole lot. So some light precipitation kind of on the edges of this north central region, otherwise pretty dry over the next 7 days. So this is covering the period from today through Thanksgiving. So we'll take it out a little bit further. and this is a probability, so it's not an actual amount of warmer or wetter or drier. This is looking at the probability of temperature pattern and of precipitation patterns. So in this 8 to 14 day outlook, so this covers the period November 25th through the end of the month, through December 1st. If we focus in on our temperatures, the western kind of half of this north central region, kind of from Nebraska and the Dakotas and Kansas westward, the odds are tilted toward warmer than normal conditions. Near normal for kind of the central states and the region, and looking to the east, the odds are leaning in the below normal temperature category. Along with these temperature projections are generally below normal precipitation conditions. Again, this is a time of year where we don't typically see a lot of precipitation, so drier than normal for much of the region, aside from kind of this wet signal that we're starting to see here in the Pacific Northwest and filling in a little bit of the mountainous areas in Montana. So this is the short-term climate outlook. Now let's look at December and then seasonal outlooks. So as you all have heard and has been talked about over the last, we've been in the La Niña pattern last year, and that's looks like it's going to be the case this year. And the graphic that you're seeing just illustrates our tendencies in a La Niña pattern. There is variability from year to year, and no two La Niñas are alike, and there's other factors that come into play, but generally speaking, this is what we tend to see during winter time in La Niña. So we're currently in an advisory. It's projected that we'll be in a moderate La Niña by midwinter, and a shift to neutral is most likely scenario by late spring to early summer. So what does that mean for our outlooks? So for December, so these outlooks were released today. Generally see a La Niña type of pattern, temperatures leaning above normal for the kind of the southeastern portion of this region. Equal chances for the other part of this kind of northern and eastern parts of the region, equal chances for above, near normal, or below normal. Precipitation is showing kind of two tendencies for two wetter than normal areas, kind of in the northwest part of the region and around the Great Lakes. And as I mentioned earlier, the Great Lakes are warm now, so that could be an enhanced, both the La Niña pattern as well as lake effect snow and the opportunity to take up some of that moisture from these warm Great Lakes. That's kind of helping with this above normal chances for wetness here. Equal chances for a large portion of the region, and then along that southern tier, you can see for the southern U.S. as a whole, a tendency to below normal precipitation conditions. So this is for December. Now I'll show the winter outlook. So this NOAA officially released their winter outlook about a month ago, and so this was adjusted or revisited, and NOAA came out with their revised winter outlook just today, and the patterns are fairly similar than their original outlook. And again, we're seeing this influence of a La Niña pattern, so chances for below normal temperatures in the north and western portion of the region, equal chances in between, and then warmer than normal conditions in the southern part of the region, and then extending up through a portion of Iowa and into Wisconsin. And then shifting over to precipitation, again, we're keeping this above normal precipitation chances, again, for kind of the Great Lakes region, and this compared to December, this is extending a bit further south, and the chances for below normal precipitation, those are shifting a bit further southward than what we saw for just the December outlook. Equal chances in the middle, and then increased chance for wetness, again, in portions of Wyoming and into Montana. Okay, so thinking through those outlooks, that's one thing that's driving this seasonal drought outlook. So again, this is released today, and it covers the period November through February, so the winter period. Two main areas of improvement associated with the wet signal, again, portions of Wyoming and Montana, as well as the portion of the Great Lakes area, part of Minnesota, Wisconsin, northern Illinois, and northeast Iowa. And then further to the south in our region, drought development likely around Colorado and Kansas border. And then the brown that you see in the middle, persistence of current drought. Okay, now I did just want to mention NOAA has produced these nice graphics that look at typical snowfall during a weak La Nina year, that's on the left, versus a strong La Nina year, that's on the right. So you do see kind of some shifting patterns based on whether it's a weak or a strong La Nina. So in years in the past where we've had weak La Ninas, we've seen enhanced chance for snowfall over a lot of the central and northern portions of the region, and a dry signal there for Colorado, southwest Nebraska, and western Kansas. And looking at the right, for these strong La Nina years, we see enhanced snowfall there in the northwest, and more of a drier pattern for a lot of the central US, aside from northeast, North Dakota, Minnesota, and into Wisconsin. So La Nina years can vary, and it also can vary based on whether it's a strong or weak La Nina. And then finally, just another thing to think about, something I think about in Nebraska, because we've seen strong trends during the month of February over the last 30 years. If we take the central region, kind of this north central US as a whole, our climate trends on a monthly basis throughout the winter, they are different depending on whether it's early or late winter. So for temperatures, December's have been trending slightly warmer, January's have been getting warmer, and February's we've seen a pretty strong trend, about 5 degrees Fahrenheit over the last 30 years in temperature. And we experienced something this past February in 2021, in fact, that was record cold for a lot of areas in the central US. Precipitation does see differences in recent trends over the last 30 years. Wetter during December, slightly drier during January, and wetter during February. So just another factor to take into account. Again, this is for the central region as a whole, so your specific location may be different than this, but just thinking of from a regional perspective, these are how we've trended over the last 30 years. All right, just one more outlook here. So January, February, and March outlook, we see similar tendencies of what we saw for the winter outlook. So for the temperature, that probability for above normal temperatures is staying in a pretty similar area as it was for the winter, as well as that cold bubble that we see in the northwest, and then equal chances of warmer or colder in between. And similar for precipitation, we see these bubbles of increased chance for wetness in the northwest, in the Great Lakes areas, and extending down into through Missouri and Kentucky, equal chances in the middle, and then increased chance for dryness in the southwest. Okay, so recapping some of the key impacts here. Growing season ended later than average this year. Harvest is at or nearing completion. It is lagging compared to normal in some of the wet areas that have seen heavier than normal precipitation in recent areas. There's concern for winter wheat condition in northern and western areas, areas where it's dry. We'd like to see some moisture, especially in these areas and in other areas of drought before freeze up. Anything that we can get now before the soils freeze will be helpful to help fill up those dry soil profiles that we have in the West. Fire danger, that will continue to be an issue, especially again in that area that I highlighted in that graphic on fire danger. So in the western part, kind of the high plains region, until that snow cover gets established. And in terms of the outlook, La Niña advisory, again, is currently in effect. According to NOAA, moderate La Niña event is on tap for the winter. Northwest and eastern portions of the region expecting to see wetter than normal conditions. The drought outlook is predicting improvement in drought conditions and a potential for excessive wetness actually in the Ohio Valley, the areas that it has been wet with this climate outlook that we're seeing with wetter than normal conditions. And we could see some issues lasting through the winter and even thinking further out with next planting season. Conversely, dryness and potential warmth for the southwest region. The likelihood of drought going into the 2022 growing season for Colorado and Kansas. So we're looking at drought development in these areas, and if we don't get good snowfall season, don't get good precipitation over the course of the winter, then thinking about what this means for the start of the growing season. And then finally, keeping recent trends in mind. These winter outlooks are for the overall winter conditions, and we do know that conditions will vary throughout the course of the winter. And keeping those recent trends in mind where we do see differences by month. All right, just some ending slides here. So again, you can get a recording of today's and past presentations at the two websites that you see there, Purdue and UNL, the Midwestern and High Plains Regional Climate Centers. And a lot of the information that you saw here was gathered from the following websites and from the following resources. And thanks to Pete Belagan out of Minnesota for the nice fall picture there. And I will leave it on this slide for a bit. Those are, so there's my contact information and Dennis, who is on the phone here today, as well as Doug. And we've got a contact from the Drought Mitigation Center, Brian Fuchs, as well as Melissa Whithelm with the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. So please feel free to reach out to any of us. And I will open up for questions, or Doug, see if you would like to show the image that you mentioned.
Yeah, I'll do that real quick, and then we can go back to your presentation if there are specific questions
Okay.
regarding slides. So, see how the heck am I going to do this? Show my screen. Well, there's nothing to look at here. Oh, there we go. I guess I have to ask, which screen are you seeing? Martha.
Now we can see yours now.
Yeah, can you see the snowtail image?
Yes.
Yes,
All
Doug,
right.
you did a really good job coloring inside the lines on that.
Thank you. So this is not Doug Cluck. This is not my work, I should say. This is the NRCS's work, as you can see down at the bottom. Just want to make sure you know that. But anyway, the snowtail sites are high elevation snow observation monitoring. And so all these little areas are different basins across the West. And the ones really to pay attention to are those sort of on the upper right. And those are percent of normal. Now it's very, very, very early in the snow gathering, if you will, or accumulation season. And if you kind of know where the continental divide is, and anything to the right of that is the area that we're concerned with leading into the Missouri, mainly the Missouri River Basin. A lot of these feed the Missouri. And as you can see up in Montana, where they desperately need lots and lots of snow, we're starting off the season a bit below or a lot below normal. if it were 100%, it would be that light green shading, and would say 100 or something around 100%. There's a few in there that are a little high, but these again, it's really early in the season, and these at this time of year, they really fluctuate quickly depending upon a week's worth of no snow or a week's worth of snow. So, in January, start paying much more attention to this. I know a lot of people will pay attention to it before that, but I just wanted to show you kind of where we stand, and we'll try to show this each month from here on out. Okay, back to Martha. Get ready, Martha.
All right.
Okay, so one question that has come through, and it kind of goes back to the snowfall. Maybe you should show that if you can get back to, or La Niña snow. Did I send it back to you, Martha?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay, and it kind of goes back to that, and really the question is, you showed a weak La Niña and a strong La Niña. So what's in between?
Yeah.
And that's first of all, I want everybody to know this is October through April. So what we call the entire cool season, and the potential for the most snow is during that time anyway. So what comments would you have if someone asked you what happens with a moderate, which is what we're saying right now in terms of moderate La Niña?
It is. I'm thinking of an image that I saw from somebody that works at NCI on Twitter, and he looked at last snow season, which I didn't ask his permission, so I don't feel comfortable sharing, but I can kind of use my mouse to describe the conditions that we saw last winter are kind of in between these two that you see here, where it was less than normal snow kind of for the northern region, and for the central portion of this north central region, we had above normal snowpack. So it was something in between, which last winter, if I remember correctly, it wasn't a particularly strong La Niña year. Doug, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but keeping that in mind and the trends that we've seen over the last 30 years, it's possible that we would see something like that. I don't know, Doug or Dennis, if you have comments or opinions on that.
You're right. Last year was a moderate La Niña, and we're probably going to end up around that again this year. Part of the issue we had last year was, Martha, you were right, that band kind of from Nebraska across Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, they had repeated snowfalls right along this same band right through that area. It was fairly narrow. It was kind of an interesting area. And that may have been La Niña related, or it just may have been some other effect that is more difficult for us to predict, to be able to determine those kinds of details.
Yeah, so just generally, and this goes for almost any long-term prediction, seasonal prediction, or monthly on out, is that there are several different major influences globally that can affect and mess up, if you will, our El Nino or La Nina outlooks. The El Nino and La Nina outlooks, or I should say, we call them teleconnections, but they influence North America in a particular manner. We sort of know what that is, but chaos in the system and other influences on shorter time periods will totally mess up that pattern. And this is what happens, and why it's so hard to say, well, absolutely, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have more snowfall in Sioux Falls this year. But we're not saying that. What we're saying is, I don't know what we're saying in terms of snowfall, because we have sort of this dichotomy of different La Niñas in front of you. But I think what we should go back to is sort of the overall precipitation view for the season, which I think is equal chance, unfortunately, in that part of the country anyway, equal chances of above, below, or near normal. Now, in Montana, especially in the higher elevations, and Wyoming for that matter, there is a fairly strong tendency to see above normal, normal to above normal precipitation. Okay, that's a pretty good, that's a better correlation than almost anywhere. Same in the Ohio Valley. The other thing we didn't mention was that, and Martha was getting to it actually when she said February tends to be cold. It sure has been, especially during these La Nina years where it seems as if winter doesn't kick in until late. So far this fall has been really mild, and I think most people sort of, for the most part, are enjoying that. But I don't know when the switch is going to get flipped, and it may not. We may have another year like, what was it, 2012, where, gosh, it was hard to find any really cold air for any period of time. But what's more likely to happen, and Dennis, yeah, feel free to comment, is that at some point we will start getting more polar and Arctic influence down here. So go ahead.
Well, and that gets to the question that Bryce posed, and the questions was, looking at a strong push of cold in February, which is a distinct possibility, but right now we can't say that with great certainty. And I know, Bryce, why you're asking, because there's multiple reasons behind that. Some of that is energy related, and some of it is just otherwise cold related. So it is possible. We just can't say that with great certainty right
now. Some of the other questions that and let me see if there's anything else related to La Nina here real quick that I missed. We got the snowfall, okay, and we talked a little bit about Bryce's concern. Well, Martha, with the elevated fire potential that was noted on the one graphic that you showed, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, are there smoke impacts expected for Kansas and Nebraska should wildfires occur? And I think the easy answer is probably yes, but also that the fact that Kansas may see elevated fires as well, based on the forecast being drier and warmer, and maybe having a longer fire season. So smoke is the question. I think we're talking, what are we talking for? Is this an outlook, or is this just as of this moment? Martha?
Yeah, this is observed, and so the same resource does have a projected, so they do have an observed as well as a forecasted fire danger. So there are various resources from the U.S. Forest Service. Again, that is current conditions and forecasted, but this was as of Tuesday.
Yeah, I have not looked at the forecast. They tend to move, if there's an elevated area of fire, that tends to move south in the winter for obvious reasons. I haven't looked at those, Martha or Dennis. I don't know if you have, to see if there were elevated concerns for fire across the south. I wouldn't be surprised at all if there were. And if someone wants to comment on that, feel free in the group. There may be some people on who know a lot more about that than we do at the moment. Okay, I'm going to go to some other questions and comments. There was one interesting person from McHenry County in Illinois, which is just north of Chicago, along the Wisconsin border, saying they've been in a bad drought for a long time, and all the other counties around them seemed to have off and on precip, and they're just not getting any of it. And they're having severe to extreme drought kind of continuing. And is there a name or explanation for the highly targeted area of drought? Now, I don't know if there's a name for targeted areas of drought over a long period of time, other than desertification, and that's sort of tongue-in-cheek. So I think it's unlucky, mainly. But Dennis or Martha, anything you'd like to comment on about that localized of an area?
That's exactly how I'd put it. You're unlucky.
Yeah. So in the climate world, those things are very interesting to us, but there's no great explanation, especially if there's not terrain. Well, there is the Great Lakes, but there's no terrain around that would cause that to happen. It has to be luck or unluck.
Yeah, it's tough to think of a physical reason as to why that would be missing out.
Right.
It seems that about every year there's some area that is worse than others that just gets missed. I would agree that this area is really quite small for how severe the problem is there. And it's severe enough that even if you do get some rain, it still doesn't make as much of a dent in it as you would hope.
Right. And Dennis, I think you answered some of these questions earlier, but topsoil and subsoil moisture measured by USDA. The question was, how are topsoil and subsoil moisture? And I think he is referring to, the brown one, the brown map. Yeah, that one. And go ahead and maybe or Martha, say a few words about that.
Martha, do you want to jump in, or you want me to take it?
Okay.
Go ahead, Dennis. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, these are observers who again, volunteers who work with the USDA, National Agricultural Statistics Service. Many of them are extension people, sometimes other folks, and they report weekly. As far as I know, there are really no numbers or sensors or anything they're looking at. They're assessing based on overall conditions. That's why you see them reported at a state level, because if you look at these from a state level standpoint and you put all the indicators together, you could say at a state level, here's kind of what it is. And when you're getting, there are other questions about soil moisture. Soil moisture is incredibly important. It's incredibly difficult to deal with because of how you measure it, how we model it, what kind of sensors we use, the different depths. It's really incredibly difficult, but incredibly important. So I tried to address those in some of the questions there.
Yeah, because one of the other questions was, why isn't this model soil moisture corresponding with the drought monitor? And you kind of got to that in terms of it's not the only thing that they take into account on a drought monitor.
Yep.
Right. There's a lot more to it. Yep.
And we don't trust one of these soil moisture model maps. We like to look at different ones and say, are they saying the same thing? Or are they saying different things?
Right. And yeah, there are often disconnects, and it doesn't always make the most sense. Okay, and I think, recent talk about La Niña strengthening. Do you see the same? Yeah, just to get back to that a little bit. Yes, there is a potential for it to edge up into the strong category. One of the things that's different about, I think, and Dennis and Martha, correct me if I'm wrong, this year as opposed to last year, is that the atmosphere and the ocean in the equatorial Pacific are interacting together as you would think they should very well during a La Niña year. So, from a prediction point of view, that's good, because then you can kind of rely more on that than influencing North America at some point in the future. But I don't know about strengthening, and some people would say, well, strengthening doesn't mean that much, and so we try to put labels, we try to quantify strength of La Niña and El Nino all the time. And maybe we put a little bit too much emphasis on that. And that's a good overall view of how if the La Niña just had if we could put 100% of prediction into La Niña, that's the way it would look more or less across the U.S. The other thing to mention is the wetness in the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes later in the season, if you will, late winter. Okay. That, for the most part, wraps up the discussion. Is there anything else folks would like? Whoop, here's another question here. There have been times when soil moisture impressions improved during a week with no rain. Yeah, that's probably true. And then, okay. And from Kansas, our state climate office person says, yes, there are concerns for fire, or concerns for fires shift southward, and there are elevated fire weather concerns in drought-stricken areas of South Central, highlighted here on the predictive services. Okay. As for spring burning, it's usually impacted by persistent by persistent rain preventing burns or burn bans. It isn't possible to expect what land managers will do if conditions are ideal. Okay, thanks, Chip, for that comment. Oh, there's another question. Sorry. What are the signs of the storm track is moving into the northern plains? Question mark. Then snow time is the next question. What are the signs that the storm track is moving into the northern plains? And I think maybe even referring to this image right here, when are we going to get here? I think is the question. And Martha, you can answer that question, or Dennis. And if it does that mean snow?
Yeah, I wish I could give you an accurate answer to that question. I don't, given the precipitation outlook in the near term, I don't see it happening in the next few weeks. Maybe Dennis, you've got another opinion. One thing to be watching is the overall pattern and kind of what's going on in the North Pacific here in this blocking high. How much moisture is being brought into the West Coast. But those are things that I look for. But in the near term, I don't see it happening. I wish I could answer that question.
Well, Martha, can go to the 8 to 14 day outlook.
Yeah.
And there's a modified version of what we're seeing here because, go back one. There's cold over the East Coast, but then warmth over the Western U.S. because that ridge is going to be very strong over the whole Western U.S. and then a large trough or a dipping of the jet over the whole Eastern U.S. So it's much more modified or amplified, we call it. So there's a big build up in the ridge in the west and then a troughing in the east. But I don't think that's going to persist as long. So, and then that leads to, dry conditions throughout much of the central U.S. because just not access to moisture for anywhere.
Right. And it is generally getting to be the driest time of the year for much of the north central part of the U.S., excluding maybe the Great Lakes area and some of the higher elevations out west. So,
wasn't that a Christmas song? The driest time of the year? No, the most wonderful time of the year. That's what it is.
And Martha, show December real quick, if you will, the monthly. Yeah. So there's a tendency for the southwest part of this region, I guess, Colorado and Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, to show up as leaning towards warm, and the rest of the area not. So, we cross our fingers and hope, especially in the dry areas, that some of this precipitation actually happens. So we shall see. But I think that's it for this month. Thank you, everyone, for attending and sticking in there to the end. Thank you very much, Martha. Great presentation and great delivery. Thanks, Dennis, for answering all the hundreds of questions that you do every time. And we will see you when we reconvene with Justin Gleason from Iowa State climatologist in December. And maybe we'll know more. Of course, then maybe we won't. But anyway, stay tuned. Thank you so much, everyone.